Ha, so tired. On his bed in the former mayor's manor of Erantal, Ines Ulgaun lay face down in defeat. It had been a long day. Too long. As he had feared, piles of paperwork awaited his return. The entire morning had been spent in his office with Albedo, who seemed hell-bent on making up for the time she had lost together with him. His stroll through the city with Momin and Nobe took up the greater part of the afternoon, and he couldn't remember most of the updates Pandora's actor had given him during that time. When Ines came back to the manor, he found himself in his office again for a second round of paperwork that lasted well into the evening. I need a vacation. Ines wearily turned his head to face the nightstand beside the bed, letting out another long sigh. The titles upon it were still as intimidating as ever, especially the massive tomes written by that girl from the Empire. In the past few weeks, he had attempted to make some progress on his reading by changing his approach. Rather than trying to slog through from beginning to end, which always had him give up a few paragraphs in, he would skim through the index to find subjects that seemed interesting. As interesting as a thesis on the operation of a magocratic state could present, at any rate. The Sorceress Kingdom was functionally a feudal state with a monarchy that was bound by its laws. This was due to the legal framework inherited from Reistais, which had caused Albedo and Demiurge to protest the idea that Nazaric's supreme overlord could be bound by such paltry things as human laws. Even as a monarchy, one could say it was a magocracy since he was the Sorcerer King, or was that wrong? Regardless, there were several topics that he thought would be highly relevant to the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Unfortunately, even with his interest piqued, he quickly became lost in the advanced material that seemed to require extensive familiarity with the subject matter to even grasp at the most basic of levels. And so the vision for his nation remained as nebulous as the Katza mist, following his vague directions and half-baked ideas. Stability was a given, considering their relative strength. Albedo and her administration kept things running as close to clockwork as could be expected, with improvements reportedly made week by week. Yet, a secure nation run by an inhumanly perfect bureaucracy was never his goal. If anything, he might have liked it better if there were always little problems for him to fix here and there. Not only would that make him feel useful, but as it was, things still felt too sterile and soulless. Ines wanted the Sorceress Kingdom to be a nation known for its character, a place that its people could be proud of, just as Ines was proud of the guild that was the source of the nation's inspiration. The concept of national identity did not exist in the societies that had formed in the region. At the least, it was weak, a far cry from the national spirit that prevailed over countries in the modern era of his former world. Perceptions of statehood were in fact not much different than Earth in the early Renaissance. Common folk did not care about the nation that they belonged to. They cared about their families and the villages that they lived in, whether they could survive the winter and if they had sufficient security to eke out a living. Race and religion weighed far more than the sense that one belonged to a kingdom or an empire. Whether a farmer was from Reistais, Baharuth, or Oblé, this outlook on life was much the same as anywhere else. The people that cared about things like history and a legacy greater than themselves tended to be those who could afford to. As such, it was affluent aristocrats and, ironically enough, adventurers that tended to affiliate themselves with nations. Even with them, however, the sense of collective national identity was tenuous, at best. If a noble's title went from Reistais to Baharuth, they no longer considered themselves a noble of Reistais despite their house serving that nation for generations or the fact that their new liege was their former enemy. As Baroness Zaradnik had put it, they were no longer one another's business and moved on to see to the business that mattered. When it came to adventurers, it was more in the sense that they claimed to protect a nation's people. If they felt it was to their advantage to change their base of operations, then they did so as a matter of course. Despite being protectors of the people, they could just as easily leave them behind. It was a hypocritical, mercenary mindset unsuited for individuals entrusted with the security of a state. With this in mind, it was the aristocracy, with the culture and ties that they forged within their territories, that came the closest to achieving something like national spirit. People loved and fought for their landlords. Or they quietly hated them. Either way, they were icons that represented the world of the common folk, their homes and the immediate connections to the lands around them. This energy was something he needed to harness somehow for the Sorceress Kingdom as a whole, something necessary to make the nascent nation more than something that existed by piece of the sword alone. Light tapping sounded from the bedroom door, followed by a respectful voice. "Ines Summer," Shiltir Summer has requested an audience. Shiltir? That's rare, she usually doesn't come to see me in this manner. Ainz rose from his bed, glancing out the window. Night had fallen upon Erantle, and not a trace of the sunset remained. Have her brought to my office, Sixus, he said. I will be out shortly. He gave the room a quick once-over before the maid on duty returned to attend him. As they made their way through the manor, Ainz wondered what the visit could be about. If there was some sort of emergency, he would have been contacted via message. It was not an immediately pressing matter, yet it was important enough for her to come and see him personally. 3 vampire brides stood outside of the door to his office, and they lowered their heads deeply as he passed. Inside, Shiltir awaited him in front of his desk, dressed in her black ballroom gown. She spread out her skirts in a curtsy at his approach. Ainz Summer. I hope the evening finds you well. It's been a busy day, he said as he seated himself. And the days are bound to become busier once Demiurge sets his plan in motion. I almost wish I could return to the relaxing journey we had over the past 2 weeks. Ah, Ainz Summer. She beamed radiantly. It fills me with joy that I could be of some service to you. If ever you desire, I will be more than happy to arrange for another trip. I will keep that in mind. So, what brings you to request such a rare audience? Shiltir fell silent at his question, lips twitching slightly as her hands fidgeted over her lap. What's the matter, Shiltir? Ainz Summer, have I been serving you well? A complex expression filled her face as she asked and awaited his response. It reminded him of the time shortly after her revival, when fear, doubt and shame plagued her every word and action. Ainz had forgiven Shiltir for what had happened, but she had never forgiven herself. No words existed to console her, no punishment could lift the weight of her sin from her shoulders. Following their journey to the Dwarf Kingdom, her vigor was renewed as she threw herself at the task he had assigned to her, but he supposed that the spectre of the past was not so easy to exorcise. After so long, perhaps she finally felt ready to put it all behind her. I think you have done an exceptional job, Shiltir, he said. Your growth has far exceeded my expectations, as have the results of your work. So much in fact that I believe you are more than ready to act as the Minister of Transportation in full. The Sorceress Kingdom's logistical network, its land, sea, air and magical infrastructure, will be entirely under your management. If there is anything that you require, do not hesitate to ask. Thank you very much. She bowed deeply several times. I am honored that your most exalted self has entrusted this task to me. Ainz smiled to himself as the floor guardian's excitement filled the office. It wasn't one born of indulgence, but out of pride for Peroncino's daughter, who had grown so much. After several more bows, Shiltir seemed to get a hold of herself. An uncertain expression replaced her smile, and her eyes went to some spot over his right shoulder. He turned to see what she was looking at, but there was nothing there. Then, if I may ask, Ainz Summer. Oh, she's actually going to ask for something? Well, it's not as if feelings alone can build a transportation network. Since she had been managing things well so far, Ainz figured that Shiltir would be well aware of the costs that came with a nation's infrastructure. More than he was, at any rate. I understand the magnitude of the responsibilities that I have bestowed upon you, he said. Any funds or items that you require can be withdrawn from the treasury. I will inform Pandora's actor. You have my thanks, Shiltir said, but what I need are people, aren't you? People? I suppose there are some mercenaries stored in Ashurbanipal that would be suited for labor. It is not labor that I require, Ainz Summer. I see, then what sort of people do you need? As you know, most of Nazarik's denizens capable of duties outside are already doing what they can. This is especially the case with our ongoing operations in Riastais and Roblay. Fortunately, my request does not involve Nazarik's limited resources. Ainz Summer, did Baroness Saradnik please you? So she means to employ some of the citizens. She really has come a long way. I believe that she will be a great boon to the Sorceress Kingdom, he replied. Not only is she a talented and industrious individual, but possessed of a rare character that I can only wish we had more of. I do not know what she was like when you first met her, but you did well in bringing her to our side. In that case, Shiltir said, there are some additional individuals that I would like to take as my vassals and bring over to our side. They will all be crucial for my work in the future. As your vassals? Who are they? Countess Corlin, Countess Wagner, and Baroness Cognier. Heinz leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. He brought a hand up to stroke his chin and thought. Her claim that they would be crucial for her work was most likely the case. Countess Corlin was a prodigy whose expertise and foresight would prove invaluable to Schultier's efforts. Countess Wagner was a key player in transportation technology. Baroness Cognier forged social and economic connections between the disparate peoples of the Sorceress Kingdom. All three were the heads of successful merchant houses, sharing common ground in their knowledge of logistics and trade. Not only that, they were all exceptional administrators with successful territories under their management. Together with Baroness Zaradnik, who could offer insights on the military side of things, Schultier would have the cornerstones upon which he could build the Ministry of Transportation into a force to be reckoned with. He couldn't even begin to imagine where their work would lead. They were all noble women he had seen in the company of Schultier since shortly after the founding of the Sorceress Kingdom and reportedly worked closely with her. The three she had requested were his direct vassals, meaning that he could indeed transfer their titles to Schultier. Such a move was something no ordinary ruler would have considered out of the fear that they would lose power and influence, but Heinz was no ordinary king. Schultier's work was essential to the future of the Sorceress Kingdom. As a bonus, the many burdens that came with managing transportation and infrastructure would be left in hands immeasurably more capable than his. Very well, he said. They are yours. However, this transfer of authority will have to wait until the end of the season. Pandora's actor might cry if a huge portion of the Sorceress Kingdom's tax revenue was snatched away at the last second. I assume you will be using their taxes to build up our nation's infrastructure and associated facilities? Yes, Ein Sommer. It will be sufficient for our construction efforts, as well as research and development. I will, of course, be paying you my taxes according to the laws of the nation. There's no need for that. Oh, but I insist. Schultier smiled. After all, it is only fitting as a successful vassal, aren't you? None of the others will come remotely close to matching my contributions to Nazarik's coffers. It was the first he had ever heard of someone paying taxes to get ahead. Since he so often envisioned Nazarik and the Sorceress Kingdom as corporations over which he presided as CEO, Heinz felt that he should be the one paying out a salary to the Guardians. In mere months, however, Schultier generated several orders of magnitude more revenue for Nazarik than Heinz had managed to scrape up while working as an adamantite adventurer. I suppose I'll be looking forward to it, then, he sighed. More importantly, do you truly believe that they can be brought over to our side? Heinz was still at a loss as to how a -450 karma NPC could command such unswerving loyalty from Baroness Zaradnik. I think it is inevitable, Schultier replied. That they're all good friends will make it that much easier. And what about you? Heinz asked. Your relationship with Baroness Zaradnik, do you consider her a friend? Ludmilla is more than a friend, Ein Sommer, Schultier said. She is my vassal, aren't you? Something like an area guardian, perhaps? With their audience concluded, Schultier swept her skirts out in an elegant curtsy before turning to make her way out of the office. Her hips swayed as she glided through the doorway, brimming with confidence. Heinz watched her leave with some bemusement. An area guardian, huh? More than a friend, to be called a vassal by a floor guardian of Nazarik held far greater significance to its denizens. An area guardian was a position of power, respect, and authority bestowed upon the blessed few by the 41 supreme beings. To be genuinely considered in similar terms was praise of the highest order. The door whispered shut behind Schultier. Then it opened again. Ein Sommer, Sixus said. Demiurge Summer has requested an audience. Bring him in. The golden-haired homunculus maid stepped aside, allowing the guardian of the 7th floor entry. As usual, Demiurge was wearing his red suit with its orange pinstripes. Heinz thought that there might be an extra spring in his step, but he might have been seeing things. Ein Sommer, Demiurge placed a hand over his breast and bowed deeply. It is my deepest pleasure to once again bask in your supreme presence. I trust that your journey has been a fruitful one? Umu, Heinz nodded. There were many unexpected gains, and it was an enjoyable experience overall. You will have to forgive me for engaging in such frivolous pursuits when you have been working so hard. The archdevil chuckled, lips curving up in a wicked grin. You are far too humble, Ein Sommer. My meager efforts are as amateurish flailings compared to your masterful machinations. If my work was to prepare the Holy Kingdom for your eventual dominion, then surely yours was to set the stage for events that will shake the entire world. No, I literally just sailed up and down a river and looked at some ruins. Nothing to see here. I presume it is matters of the Holy Kingdom that have brought you here tonight? Indeed, all has been readied. We await your word to commence. The conquest of the Abelian Hills and the subversion of the Holy Kingdom of Roble. Demiurge had presented him with a script to review, of which he could only say Umu. The first phase was the subjugation of the Abelian Hills. Demiurge would gather all of the races whose existence would be problematic to the Sorceress Kingdom and use them as an army to attack the Holy Kingdom. Once sufficiently pressed, the Holy Kingdom would have no choice but to seek outside help. Their delegation would arrive in the Sorceress Kingdom and Ainz would lead the Holy Kingdom's forces on a campaign to liberate their cities. Once that was done, he would defeat Yaldabaoth and save the peoples of the Abelian Hills from their demonic overlords. It was, in part, for this reason that he had Baroness Zaradnik lead her undead company through the Katza Plains. She started out with a ragtag force that would not be much different than the survivors of the demi-human onslaught and ended with a company that was roughly equivalent to a regiment of the Holy Kingdom's army. Carefully watching her progress gave him what he felt was a good grasp of how low-level armies functioned. He probably couldn't use any of her more disturbing methods for publicity reasons. At one point, he asked about more image-friendly tactics in a roundabout manner to no avail. Still, he was confident that he would at least not look entirely ignorant when playing his part in Demiurge's script. Very well. You may begin. And so, with a regal gesture practiced in front of his bedroom mirror countless times, Ainz Ulgaun sealed the fate of an entire nation. Good evening, Miss Aramis. Good evening, Lady Zaradnik. The rustle of fallen leaves whispered over the grounds of Castle Corlin, carried by the chill winds heralding the autumn harvest. Tyre Aramis shivered slightly and drew her woolen shawl more tightly around her shoulders. She led Ludmilla through the warm hallways of the castle keep. It was more a palace, really, and up to the third floor. If it was one thing that marked the difference between Ludmilla and her childhood friend, luxury would be the closest word to describe it. Born 100 kilometers downriver and an entire world away, Clara Corlin was the epitome of civilian aristocracy, a noble amongst nobles. This luxury was not to be mistaken for opulence, however, as Clara was just as austere as she. Every action taken, purchase made and project constructed was a careful calculation that Ludmilla struggled to see every facet of. Rather than drive herself crazy trying to discern the meaning behind every detail of the ornate corridors, she reached into the infinite haversack on her right hip and withdrew 2 books freshly scribed and bound. Each was an exact copy of the journal she had picked up in the rune-crafted vault in Lagos, which the Sorcerer King had delivered to the Royal Archive of Ashurbanipal for safekeeping. Ludmilla could read perhaps a quarter of its content, but it simply wasn't enough to make sense of much of it. Clara, however, could probably at least get half. It would long be the object of study, but, with a full translation, she thought they would finally be able to discover the truth behind the Katza Plains. A knock on the door of Clara's private chambers echoed lightly down the immaculate corridor. Her friend's voice issued softly from the other side. Yes? Lady Zaradnik has come to see you, my lady. Please, come in. Tyre opened the way and led Ludmilla further in. Seated comfortably on her bed was Clara Corlin, looking snug and warm beneath her silken sheets with documents spread all about her. Shall I have something prepared, my lady? Clara's amethyst gaze went to Ludmilla, who shook her head. Seeing this, Tyre excused herself, shutting the door quietly behind her. Clara's eyes continued to linger until she finally set down the papers in her hand and rested a cheek on her knees. So our rook has finally taken to the field, she said. It is about time you joined the game. Ludmilla could only offer a resigned smile in reply. With a mere glance, her friend had discerned the change that had come as a result of her time with the Sorcerer King. She wasn't even dressed in the new outfit that His Majesty and Lady Sheltier had bestowed upon her. And what game might that be? Ludmilla asked. The only one that matters, Clara answered with a small smile of her own. Bringing the light of the Sorceress Kingdom to the world. Afterward. Well, this afterward conveniently falls on the last day of the year. How strange. Happy holidays to everyone and thank you for your continued interest in Valkyrie's Shadow. Legacy of the Plains is a much smaller volume both by word count and in terms of its scale. That being said, it has a far more personal feeling to it and sets the stage for many things to come. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Like the Overlord novels and previous volumes of Valkyrie's Shadow, Legacy of the Plains is divided into housekeeping acts and adventure acts. The adventure this time is with Ainzulgaon, which is something I think readers have long been looking forward to. Where are we in the canon timeline? This one is a bit easier to track, as it ends with the beginning of Volume 12. Legacy of the Plains spans roughly 2 months, beginning with Ludmilla's self-imposed seclusion of several weeks. It is now Lower Earth month in New World terms, roughly November in the Northern Hemisphere. Canonically, Irantal appears to be at around the same latitude as the Levant or south-central China, so snow is rare at lower altitudes. It's getting cold in Warden's Vale, though. 5 fires and a wedding. The volume begins with a character from Overlord canon, Andre, the trusty vassal of Torkel Volkenheim. He and the elder Lich Sanju have a bit of a mystery on their hands. As readers of Overlord canon know, the Sorceress Kingdom uses mind control magic to investigate crimes. With this piece of knowledge in mind, it feels that many go on to believe that no one can get away with any crimes in the Sorceress Kingdom. But, well, mind control doesn't provide an answer for everything, as demonstrated in the first act where the clever use of first-tier magic leaves the local authorities stumped. Though the region that Overlord takes place in is relatively tiny, it is still bigger than the light novels make it seem. You have medieval-style administrations, simplistic bookkeeping, and minimal access to instant communication. The distance that one travels for 1 hour in a car takes 2 to 4 days for these people by wagon or foot. When you have hundreds of thousands of people spread out in rural areas, keeping track of everything becomes a nightmare. Administrations can only work with the information that they have, and the information that they need does not exist. Divination magic doesn't work because divination magic requires the caster to know what they're looking for in the first place. The crime side of the story is something of a supplementary exploration of how a little bit of magic can wreak a lot of havoc, and how difficult it is for the authorities to deal with people like Succulent, even with the resources available to the Sorceress Kingdom. Fortunately for all involved, it is an exercise being conducted to figure out how to deal with these types of problems. On the administrative side, we have the Volkenheim administration's efforts to bring the Sorceress Kingdom's new ways to the fore. It is not as simple as undead plus fields plus equals profit. There are cultural and religious obstacles, as well as the existing distributions of land preventing optimal use of undead labor. There are also the various administrative inefficiencies inherited from the regular workings of a human administration that throw a wrench in the works of the Sorceress Kingdom's rigid top-down management. Ludmilla's perspective is rather scathing when it comes to Torkel's progress, so for much of the volume, readers may carry a bad impression of the young Count. By the end, however, things are shown to not be as bad as they seem. It is simply Ludmilla's tendency to focus on problems that colors her perspective. Torkel survives to see his grandchildren in Overlord canon, so I'm sure he'll be fine. Ludmilla's new reality. Saying that going from human to undead is a big change may be a bit of an understatement. Winter's Crown leaves Ludmilla with many questions and concerns over her new existence, and they don't disappear overnight. Mechanically speaking, being undead in the new world seems like it has more pros than cons. Overlord being a power fantasy with an undead protagonist certainly has a great deal to do with this. For the once human Ludmilla's Aradnik, however, it brings more worry than comfort. She doesn't revel in her newly acquired power, nor does she rejoice in immortality. In her mind, she has potentially become a monster, and the lack of a definitive answer to this question only makes things worse. She fears losing everything that she holds dear, and concepts like eternity haven't truly sunk in yet. Fortunately, her friendly, or not so friendly, Nabril comes to the rescue. These two are on the same page, yet not at the same time, which is always amusing to write and read. Most people view Nabril as a walking ball of scorn, but this side of her is only ever leveled at those that aren't on Nazarik's side. Her sense of superiority as a denizen of Nazarik is still conveyed to outsiders who are on the same side, but is also a straightforward and earnest type of character. Nabril throws Ludmilla several lifelines in her generally prideful manner, and in the end, she tells her what she needs to hear. Is it friendship? I'm not sure, but if Nabril made any friends with outsiders, this would probably be what it looks like. Some have noticed that a few of her quirks come from the Overlord spin-offs. Lian's ambition. Looking back on the second act, it has a lot of things going on. It opens with the seeds of the Sorceress Kingdom's rise as an economic and industrial powerhouse being planted by Lian Wagner. Lian is a very different sort of noble than the austere, theocracy-schooled Ludmilla Zaradnik and Clara Corlin. We get inklings of this in dialogue, but we get our first few puffs of our ambitious, playful, and slightly evil city aristocrat in the Legacy of the Plains. In Birthright, she is shown to be judgmental and world-wise. These aspects of her character also make her decisive and a force for change. This change is not a shift to good or evil, but a drive towards progress. In her mind, their region of the world is an insignificant backwater, and she fully means to push it to the forefront of civilization. Lian has what we might call an excellent household, which is something many stories sort of gloss over when it comes to characterizing the nobility. The lord or lady might ultimately be in charge, but they are surrounded by a robust support network that is much like an extended family that follows them from generation to generation. Humans are social creatures, and a noble family and their household very much impress themselves on one another. Lian's servants are also the people who grew up with her, friends, almost parental figures and reliable experts in their respective fields. They carry the pride and traditions of House Wagner every bit as much as she does. With dwarven steel, runecraft, undead labor and the innovations of House Wagner, we get a good look at these initial stirrings. People who are familiar with our own history probably know what comes next, though it will be in a fantastic flavor befitting Overlord. This sort of research and development is something that takes time, so the advance of Lian's revolution and its effects will be sprinkled throughout the story from this point forward. The Midnight Mole Merchant Company. From a minor puff in Winter's Crown, the frightened Quagoa is now a merchant on the rise. Is it luck? Skill? I am not quite sure. Windows on non-human life happen fairly often in Valkyrie's shadow, but the largest demi-human one was rather unfortunate. This time, we have a character that's riding on the train and not standing on the tracks. In the span of a couple of months, Zushiru has gone from one Quagoa amongst many dumped into an unfamiliar and hostile to them environment to a mole man of substantial means to them. He remains a sort of quintessential tribal demi-human while he makes progress as a merchant and learns about human society and tries to figure out how to fit the pieces of his old reality with his new one. This time around, Elishnish ends up as his assistant and the old relationship between the Quagoa and their former Frost Dragon masters is flipped. The Frost Dragon Bard is anything but subservient, though she has become accustomed to getting along with mortals. While Zushiru is a bit of a doormat when it comes to Elishnish, her charisma, ambition and draconic pride work in his favor by mere association. As some people might have noticed, Elishnish has always had a fixer aspect to her personality, and this comes to the fore as she acts to make Zushiru's situation better. After a month of working around the Duchy of Erantle, the Midnight Mole Merchant Company will be headed to the Baharuth Empire. As arranged by Lian Wagner, Elishnish will be along for the ride as well. A new order. The Theocracy Paladins mentioned some time ago have finally made their appearance, though their portrayal may have come as a surprise. To many, the slain theocracy is a land composed of 10,000% zealotry, and it often feels that the mere existence of religion in a character's life comes with expectations of deus vult. Religious characters in Overlord follow a more TRPG-style depiction of faith in a fantasy world, and the various scenes of religious characters in canon generally fall within the spectrum of normal people. Religion is one aspect of their lives rather than being the only aspect of it. It is true that the faith of the Six is human-centric, but it is not exactly human supremacist in our modern sense. Today, we give thanks to the gods that human beings like ourselves are still alive. Pontifex Maximus of the Slain Theocracy. Overlord Volume 10, Intermission. Humanity is weak, and it uses any and all means to defend itself. Anyone who doesn't know that is an utter and complete fool. Nigun, Commander of the Sunlight Scripture. Overlord Volume 1, Chapter 4, Part 3. The survival of the human species is the paramount objective of the faith of the Six. Its faithful understand that humans are a weak species and believe that it is by the grace of their gods that they survive at all. The Slain Theocracy champions the cause of humanity, taking up the mantle of custodian of the fledgling human nations in their vicinity whether they like it or not. That being said, this benevolence does not necessarily mean that they are a good country by Western standards. In a world where many species are outright superior to one's own and also happen to consider humans as chattel and food, their defense of humanity often comes in the form of preemptive violence, forcefully keeping the species in the vicinity stuck in a primitive, tribal state. A sufficient level of advancement in a demi-human community brings that hammer of the theocracy down upon them. The ideology represented by this interventionist policy is something that permeates all levels of the theocracy's society. The people of the theocracy believe that humanity must use any and all means to defend itself and that the enemies of humanity must be destroyed to ensure humanity's survival. While this is a reprehensible outlook in our present-day world, it is the reality of theirs. According to Maruyama, if the theocracy did not exist to intervene on behalf of the other human nations in the region, those nations would have been destroyed. 36 paladins arrive in the Sorceress Kingdom, most possessing decades of experience working to support humanity both within and beyond the theocracy's borders. While they are all devout servants of their gods, their experience has tempered their views and actions with the understanding that applying their warhammers to every problem is not always the best solution. They have been selected for good reason, as an incident in the Sorceress Kingdom could very well mean the end of everything. This act is very much a Clara act, where the theocracy paladins go to a foreign land yet find many familiar things. The people worship the same gods, speak the same language and follow many of the same customs, yet are very different in several notable ways. In the safe and prosperous setting of Corlin County, they are received with generous hospitality and are allowed the opportunity to slowly acclimate themselves to life in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Little did they know that an epiphany awaited them at the end of their journey. Now settled, they have assumed their duties as temple guards, serving the faithful in what capacity they can. Not only do they serve as temple staff, but are laying the foundations for a new paladin order in the Sorceress Kingdom. I wonder what they will call it. Romantic River Date? Ainz Ulgan makes his first long appearance in the second half of Legacy of the Plains, where we follow Ainz, Shaltir and Ludmilla on a vacation in the Katsa Plains. After some ulterior motives and various misunderstandings play out, the undead trio embarks on a journey of discovery. It can be said that the relationships that Ainz finds himself in with non-Nazaric characters can be lumped into a handful of categories. Most have the stereotypical reaction to the undead, followed by a life of fear and anxiety. If someone is particularly smart or capable, they will end up thinking themselves into a corner or become stupid or both. Jerkniv and his supporting cast from the Empire are an example of this, as Arena and Revan. Once in a while, you get a character that gets over their fear of Ainz and is either drawn in by his candid nature or awed by his power or apparent kingliness. These characters branch out to either becoming something uncomfortable for Ainz Fluda, Naya, and Fia, or people that become useful and quickly fade away. There are also those people with whom mutual respect is developed or can, but then they die before the relationship can be developed. Gazif, Kalka and Zaynak are the ones that I can think of at the moment of writing this. This is a purposeful irony woven into the overarching story of Overlord. Friends are what Ainz values the most, yet he is never allowed to have them. The closest candidates for friendship get killed off. Ludmilla Zaradnik's relationship with Ainz is a variation of the above. She is instilled with rigid respect for hierarchy, yet also develops personal respect for not just her sovereign, but many of Nazaric's denizens. And then she is killed off. Several times. She eventually gets back up again on her own, so you might say that she has survived this filtering process. As one of the undead, she naturally has no fear of the undead, but she ends up being affected in the same way that many undead are by Ainz's presence. It comes in the form of horny like Shaltir and Evil Eye, much to Ludmilla's dismay. Not only does she feel this way around Ainz, but she firmly believes that Ainz is Sursana, the most powerful of the 6 great gods that she worships. Despite this lofty bar existing from the outset, Ainz finds that her perception of a descended god is not as crazy as he feared that it might be. He finds that Ludmilla is a loyal subject who is more than willing to candidly discuss all sorts of things with him. She is also one who genuinely acts to further the goals of his Sorceress Kingdom. He may also be the subject of various calcium-laced fantasies. Despite all of this, however, the end result is that he still hasn't found a friend. At least he's happy that Shaltir has gained a reliable companion. Yeah, or not. The ghost ship and its Elder Lich captain make their appearance in this volume, but Captain Iska is not a pirate no matter how the vampire brides try to dress him up as one. Elder Liches all start as Elder Liches, all stemming from the same Yggdrasil concept incorporated in their genesis. As such, their personalities can only drift as far as their experiences change them. Captain Iska's personality is held up in contrast to both the Elder Liches of the Sorceress Kingdom and the members of his cabal. He is about as outgoing as one might expect an Elder Lich in his situation to be, and he doesn't ooze evil from every pore. When dealing with other undead, he's quite affable. There is very little to draw off of when it comes to the activities of Captain Iska and Ruin's Wake. In canon, they are rumored to exist, but there are no reports of attacks on the surrounding nations. In Mass for the Dead, the Elder Lich captain is killed by Kralgra, Igvarja's mithril rank adventurer team, but Kralgra is also killed in the process. The ghost ship later finds itself on Nazarik's side. With this in mind, I made Captain Iska close to level 30 to match the strength of a being capable of wiping out an entire team of mithril rank adventurers who regularly fight the undead and are prepared in advance for a fight against an Elder Lich. In Valkyrie's shadow, Ruin's Wake patrols the Katza Plains while Captain Iska tries to come up with ways to reliably bring in resources for the Katza Cabal. After a century of failure, his luck turns for the better when the Katza Plains comes under the dominion of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. With Captain Iska and Ruin's Wake come some more natural undead perspectives, as well as the reintroduction to Corpus of the Abyss, an organization that was first introduced in the Overlord bonus volume as part of the canon setting that existed before Suzuki Satoru's arrival over in Viria. Historical anomalies. The history of Overlord has a number of seemingly conflicting accounts of history. I suspect some of this is due to how the light novels saw a lot of copy-paste from the web novel, and some inconsistencies slipped by the editor. It is what we have to work with, however, and the post-web novel writing continues to present new inconsistencies. With this being the case, it seems that the history of the region covered by the light novel is not as it seems. We are presented with the first historical narrative presenting humanity as being in a state of near extinction, pushed to the far northwestern corner of the continent. The reason is presented as humans being at a great disadvantage to other species, and they are often viewed as prey. This notion, however, slowly falls apart as you discover that there are places where humans coexist with other species. The falsehood is blown wide open to readers in the bonus volume when we discover that there are prosperous human and multiracial nations so far away from the theocracy that they've never even heard of it. Katza has its own set of canonical inconsistencies, in particular the fact that nations that came into existence less than 2 centuries ago are making ancestral claims to a region that has construction hundreds of years old. There are several other bits of lore that pop up in later volumes, so I hope the unveiling of this mystery down the line is a satisfactory one. The stage is set. At its core, the overarching conflict of Valkyrie's shadow has always been something like a domestic one, though that's probably not the right way to put it. Nazarik is both the benefactor and the biggest threat to the Sorceress Kingdom. Whether it is the whimsical bumbling of Ainz as the Sorcerer King, the malevolent nature of the NPCs that find themselves in positions of authority and influence, or the fact that many things simply don't translate well to the new world, the challenges faced by our main cast are as often caused as they are solved by Nazarik's power. There is a larger conflict that has been brewing from the beginning, however, the game that Clara Corlin refers to at the end of this volume. Whether at home or abroad, the Sorceress Kingdom has actors who employ chaos and destruction in order to achieve its ends. Clara, on the other hand, intends to use orderly and constructive means. This interplay between two forces working for the same side is the driving conflict of Valkyrie's shadow as a whole. Everyone knows that Nazarik wins in the end, but how they win is the story told here. Settings Chapter. Ainz has been bumbling around for a while with things unfamiliar to him, but his first major arc in Valkyrie's shadow starts him off with the stuff that he knows best. Confronted by the mystery of Ludmilla's racial class levels, character build and surrounded by endless amounts of mindless undead, he is free to experiment as he pleases. I felt that this sort of mechanical exposition has been long overdue for Valkyrie's shadow, and Ainz is the perfect character to do it with. Hopefully what was covered shed some light on how background mechanics and storytelling relate to one another, both in this fanfiction and in the canon material. Personally, I prefer leaving the nuts and bolts of things like game mechanics out of narration, hoping that people can figure things out as the story goes on. Once in a while, however, I feel that things are too vague and interpretations of the writing when it comes to mechanics start landing way off of the mark and these misconceptions begin to interfere with how the story is received. Mara has been patient when it comes to this sort of thing, though you could often see him venting over it in social media when he was actively posting. Beyond all of the stuff covered in Act 4 of Legacy of the Planes, there is one more basic aspect of the Overlord mechanics portrayed in Valkyrie's Shadow that feels very difficult to get across in writing. This is partially because most people aren't familiar with the systems involved, but it's mainly because it requires one to spew forth numbers and rules explanations. What I am referring to in this particular case are classes. Class levels are divided into two main types in Overlord: racial classes and job classes. This division is simple enough to understand. Racials are levels that signify your natural growth as a member of non-humanoid species, while jobs are vocational advancement. Past this point, however, I feel that things become vague and confusing because it's left to narration to describe what people with certain job and racial classes can do. Additional confusion is added because readers often relate characters to themselves or what they understand about how people work in reality. Class systems, however, dictate what people can do. Very often in Overlord, a reader is left wondering, well, why didn't they do this, or how come they don't know who is wearing that mask? Everything else about them is the same. This is often background mechanics dictating outcomes. It is akin to failing a skill check in a TTRPG and the DM can't be asked to narrate a proper explanation in setting. The more organically written these systems are, the more difficult they are to detect and break apart for analysis. Very good writers in this genre can make it seem like everything is perfectly natural and makes sense. Maruyama goes out of his way to create vagaries in the narration to indicate that the systems exist, usually in the form of slightly interesting or humorous anomalies. Sometimes, he just says things straight out as an aside to an action or event. This usually happens for Yggdrasil entity or from their POF because things just are to them. There is, for instance, no way to organically describe why Solution can use scrolls that usually require magic casting classes. Under normal circumstances, using the magic of the scroll would require levels in the appropriate job class. In other words, one would need cleric-type class levels to use clerical spells, which were divine magic. However, certain thief-type classes had the ability to emulate a class and use magical devices by deceiving them, such as with a scroll. As an assassin, Solution had levels in several thief-type classes. Thus, she was able to use this scroll of heal, which she would not be able to use otherwise. Overlord, Volume 5, Chapter 3, Part 2. The background mechanical reason is that her build includes a rogue archetype that has UMD, Use Magic Device, which is a skill in D20 games that does exactly as this passage describes, but screw trying to figure out a smooth and organic way to deliver an in-setting explanation of UMD without taking up several scenes to clearly define the skill. By portraying it as a game explanation, he saves space and time. Such is the beauty of isekai, I suppose. At this point, some readers who are now aware that she can do this will start thinking, well, that seems awesome, why doesn't everyone learn that? The thing is that they can't. If you do not have a job class with access to UMD, you can never learn UMD. So I hope you're a rogue or bard or some magic user that has UMD as a class skill. Every other class skill works the same way. In Valkyrie's Shadow, one of the earliest examples of this is when Ludmilla finds out that her family has been cheated by merchants for generations. None of them had any idea that they were being cheated because they did not possess job classes with that type of appraisal skill. Nor did they hire any merchants to work for them due to their stubborn DIY attitude. It happens again when Leanne tries teasing Ludmilla by asking her how much she thought the Archcup was worth, but Ludmilla notices something wrong with it through her true sight and uses her persuasive skills to find a way out of directly answering. Anyhow, for this segment, I'd like to cover how job classes are balanced relative to one another. I say this loosely because some classes are just imba compared to others. We will use basic warrior archetypes for this explanation, which I hope will do the trick. Every class has an attribute array stats. Instead of the traditional attribute advancement in most D20 games rolling dice, adding points at certain levels, Overlord effectively uses a variant rule set where attribute growth is baked into class advancement. Every level that you gain contributes to this growth in that level's way. The fighter's martial flexibility is represented in the myriad of paths that they may take as they gain experience and level. Weapon focus, combat style and figuring out a broad array of associated martial arts are a few of the things that they can make active choices over. These choices factor into prestige class advancement. A fighter that focuses on being a tank will eventually qualify for the Guardian Prestige class. One who focuses on the use of a certain type of weapon will eventually qualify for the Weapon Master Prestige class. I think this is simple enough to understand even by those unfamiliar with the genre. Your choices dictate your advancement, but your choices are limited by your current classes. You have to go way out of your way to pick up an unassociated class. The non-combat side of things is where most of the confusion occurs. This section represents the skills and knowledge that a fighter can pick up on the side, be it a hobby or something supplemental to their vocation. An adventurer, for instance, might pick up limited survival skills, learn how to negotiate with clients, bargain with merchants or pick up monster lore. A lot of this side of things goes under the radar because as readers, it is something that we can do without limitations. To us, it is not a part of the action that we expect from a fighter, either. But it is a huge part of their lives. People spend more time outside of combat than in it. Those without fighter and thus the associated flexibility, like rangers, can go hang out in the woods like Pavel Baraha. Speaking of which, to compare, we have the basic ranger. As one can see, the ranger has the same basic warrior traits and its own attribute array, much like the fighter. The difference between the two classes is apparent, as the fighter's broad flexibility has almost entirely vanished. On the right side where a fighter's flexible non-combat options are, a ranger is locked into survival skills and specialized training against specific target types. These packages are powerful, but sacrifice the flexibility that one might wish for outside of combat. Survival skills are as you see listed above, but one will also note that there are skills that can be found in classes other than ranger. Stealth, traps and poison can also be found in the thief package of rogues and bards, and the survival package lacks many things found in the thief one, such as a praise item, lockpicking and UMD. The thief package is similarly missing many things from the survival package. Favored enemy bonuses are tongue-in-cheek called the power of racism by some D20 players. This bonus is described quite a few times in Valkyrie's Shadow. It is the reason why Ludmilla is so good at fighting demi-humans, understanding them, and scaring the shit out of them by merely existing. Her favored enemy as a ranger was demi-humans. In Act 2 of Legacy of the Plains, Leanne notes that Ludmilla is not creating mass panic in the demi-human quarter. The reason for this was because she lost her ranger class levels and thus the favored enemy bonuses attached to them. Her ranger levels were converted into revenant levels, but it wasn't a one-to-one conversion. Favored enemy bonuses are not exclusively hatred for a certain type of enemy, they are merely a supernatural form of expertise that manifests all sorts of bonuses against a designated creature type. An urban ranger working in a city militia would specialize in humans because they have to deal with humans all day. A hunter would specialize in fighting beasts, and this specialization would in turn unlock the Beast Tamer Prestige class. The left side is partially occupied by ranged weapon specialization, which is inherent to every ranger. Their projectiles hit harder, and they have skills and martial arts that only those with this specialization have. The remaining portion of the class is the same flexible additional martial specialization that fighters have, but it is less pronounced than that of a fighter. Most rangers will focus on ranged combat to build on their already existing ranged weapon specialization. Pavel Baraha is an example of one such ranger. Combined with favored enemy bonuses, a ranger can become infamous against their foes, just as he was. Despite his focus on archery, Pavel Baraha was also no slouch in close combat, capable of beating Orlando Campano, a sword master of Roble's 9 colors, in pure melee. Ludmilla opted to use this optional martial specialization to further her skills in melee combat. Either way, rangers are not just a fighter with a nature theme. When it comes to battle, they are the best skirmishers around. If an enemy is caught in their favored terrain or is on their list of favored enemies or both, they're in big trouble. And yes, favored terrain bonuses also exist. You see Naya's activate in Volume 12. Next up, a new volume for a new year. In the West, the Holy Kingdom of Roble is under attack by Yaldabaoth's demi-human coalition. Valkyrie's Shadow, however, moves east, to the Empire. Empire in Chains is an exploration of the Baharuth Empire and the state of its affairs following Jurkniv's capitulation to Iron Zul'Gaun. I hope I continue to entertain. Thank you once again for reading Valkyrie's Shadow. If you haven't yet done so, Please consider contributing your rating on Royal Road or even a juicy review. The Baharuth Empire is a dream for the predators of humanity, a vast land filled with prey that has collectively deluded itself into maintaining a perpetual state of standardized weakness. Damilison''ish equals Verilyn. Themis, Cleric. Alessia, Paladin. Mary, why are we doing this? We all know well, maybe not. Mary, Ranger. 3 sets of eyes turned to Elishnish, who shifted where she stood, trying her best not to cringe away. She eyed their enchanted equipment and swallowed. By and large, the mortals of this realm were harmless, but these 3 could all hurt her. Being hurt wasn't a good thing, especially for a frost dragon. She would remember it forever. Not only were these people capable of injuring her, but the monsters inside the adventurer training area also grew stronger as she gained in rank. Barring those opponents who used brute force, most had special attacks or natural weaponry capable of overcoming or outright bypassing her damage reduction. It wasn't like the Session's Platinum rank and below, where the attacks of anything that managed to get by her party mostly bounced off of her. She received scratches at most, which quickly regenerated. This realization came with her Mithril rank trial, but she had managed to get through unscathed. Her party consisted of a fighter, paladin, monk, and druid, which made for a solid wall that prevented anything from slipping through to Elishnish in the rear. The paladin was especially effective at protecting her. That paladin was also in the Orichalcum rank trial. She seemed more than happy to take all the beatings last time, so Elishnish figured that she could just keep any enemies on the other side of the paladin. Like some of the more popular tales amongst the locals, she was a knight in shining armor that protected the beautiful damsel from an evil dragon. Oh, wait. Shiva, Bard. Pleased to meet you. I'll be trying my hardest to support everyone from the rear. Nah. Elishnish froze at the sound of Mary's voice. Enua? I heard from Mopnich and the others about how you just cowered in the back last trial. What's wrong with that? Elishnish frowned. Everyone got through safe and sound and safe. Safety is important, yes? Sure, Mary replied, but it also took 4 hours when the trials should have been an hour at most. Across from Mary, Alessia scratched her head. This one is a bard, no? You speak as if she should not be performing her role in the party. That's technically true, Mary said, but she's also a dancer. Her spell songs will remain active even when she's shaking her ass in the front. How strange, Alessia said. Dancers who attempt to become combatants usually give up not long after they start. As you say, she did not fight directly for our Mithril rank trial, but bards at higher level of strength are at best light fighters that take advantage of opportunities to strike. Bard or dancer or whatever, they should not last very long in a frontline role. I think her outfit is very nice, but I do not see any special equipment. She's tougher than she looks, Mary told them. You'll see. Besides, we need to make sure Themis is capable of responding to big damage if it happens. We won't be able to get by on spell songs and patch healing alone. Alessia continued to scrutinize her for a few moments, then she shrugged. I am not against seeing how our first few fights go, she said. What is ahead of us, by the way? By the looks of it, it's a crypt. I hope we get plenty of undead. Yes, this paladin was clearly mad. Not only did she suffer injuries for others, but she also wanted undead to pop up. Elishnish found religious types strange in general. Why believe in anyone but yourself? Yup, Mary nodded, it's packed with undead. The first stretch looks like a warm-up, a few dozen skeleton warriors with a handful of red skeleton warriors. Just those? Themis asked. Well, I can't see around corners or anything, Mary said, so we should bring them to us just in case. There might be spectral undead lurking about, so keep an eye on the walls and ceiling and floor. The red-haired elf ranger led them into the trial area, stopping in the middle of the first corridor. If it's just skeleton warriors, Themis said, do we even need any buffs? Probably not, Alessia replied. Even if we take ability damage from spectral undead, it is cheaper to use lesser restoration than it is to cast Death Ward on everyone. I will take care of that, so save your mana for later. With that, they moved to block off the corridor while Mary went ahead to bring the skeleton warriors to them. Since Themis wasn't expected to cast anything, she took her place on the front line as well. Elishnish frowned. Now we're just a front line. Why do I have to stand here? Several minutes passed, and Elishnish strained her senses. Distant clattering sounds could be heard, as well as slight changes in the air currents ahead. Something was certainly happening, but she couldn't gain any sense of Mary. "Is she going to be all right?" Themis asked. "Though they are faster than regular skeleton warriors," Alessia said, "even red skeleton warriors should not be able to catch her. She is supposed to be a veteran adventurer, so I do not think she would get in trouble so easily." The two humans did not have Elishnish's keen frost dragon senses, so they could only speculate on what was going on ahead. Elishnish, however, followed what was going on as it came closer, then stopped, then started again further on. The cycle of activity repeated itself several times. Elishnish yawned. 10 minutes later, Mary reappeared. "Where are my skeleton warriors?" Alessia frowned. I sort of got carried away and destroyed them all. Their fault for being so slow." "Yeah? I'm glad we didn't cast anything," Themis muttered. "Are you injured at all?" "Nope. They didn't even get close. There weren't any spectral undead, either. Let's move in." Elishnish followed after the party, focusing her attention on their surroundings. They were on the fourth layer of the adventurer training area, which had grown into a vast complex with hundreds of kilometers of caverns, corridors and maze-like structures fashioned into a myriad of different environments. Each layer of the training area corresponded with certain adventurer ranks. The top level was for copper and iron, the next silver and gold, and so on. These layers each occupied a layer 200 meters deep to facilitate multiple levels, which meant that they were currently over 600 meters underground. "Ooh, it really feels like home in here." Elishnish turned her attention ahead at Alessia's voice. As their current session was in a crypt section of the training area, everything that might be expected of an undead-infested ruin could be found. The first chamber was lined with columns, and eerie green torches filled the air with their light. Rows of stone sarcophagi rose above a mist that clung to the ground. Steel arrows were buried all over the place, and Mary went around retrieving them. "Your home is a mausoleum?" "My meaning was the atmosphere, not the decor. I hail from Altamora, a fortress overlooking the Katsa Plains. Why would anyone want to live there?" Alessia peered at her strangely, but Elishnish was too busy lifting the covers of each sarcophagus to pay her any mind. She sniffed at the interior of one. Despite how it looked, it lacked the smell of anything like a graveyard or crypt. More importantly, there was nothing inside. She sighed in disappointment as she returned to the party, and Themis cast a reproachful look at her. "What if those were rigged with traps?" "I wouldn't have opened them if they were." Why did she even ask? Was it because the Sorceress Kingdom's Adventurer Guild lacked any high-rank bards? Maybe they weren't used to having one around. "Hey Shiva," Mary called out from where she was yanking arrows out of a column, "since you're bored, go scout the way ahead." The elf just loved to exploit her. It happened back when the guild expedition was fighting frost giants, too. Mary was one of the few people in the Adventurer Guild who knew that Shiva was in reality a frost dragon. Elishnish preferred to keep her true nature concealed from as many people as possible, which led to her acceding to all sorts of requests. Everyone else in the guild thought of her as a rising star in the organization. Her treatment generally ranged from admiring to deferential, with a healthy dose of the sexual interest that seemed so prevalent in humans. "Will you be all right?" Themis asked. "I suppose." Elishnish wandered off, tracing her way through to the next chamber. She encountered 2 traps, which she sprung out of curiosity. When nothing interesting happened, she went on to find herself at the top of a long stairway that spiraled down into the mist over 50 meters below. Weather effects did not obscure a frost dragon's vision, so a glance was all that was required to memorize everything below. There appeared to be nothing of value, so she returned to the party. The 3 adventurers looked at her, and she looked back at them. "What? What ya mean what?" Mary scowled at her. "You were scouting ahead, so you should be reporting what you found." There wasn't anything really interesting. Several moments passed in silence between them. "And? That's it. I'm going to plant a fire arrow in your butt." Why was this elf so violent? Lord Mayor was always kind to her. Maybe it was elf females in general who were the aggressive ones in their species. If that was the case, how did Heginwall manage to survive Lady Aura? "I think what she's asking," Themis quickly spoke up, "is what sort of undead or other creatures are in the next area." "Traps," obstacles, things like that. I see. In that case, I took care of the traps along the way. In the next chamber, there are 96 skeleton warriors, 48 skeleton mages, 16 wraiths and 4 elder liches. 4. Themis stared at her. Elder liches, Elishnish nodded. It's the rest we have to deal with, yes? The elder liches work for the government. Technically everyone in here is working for the government, Mary said, but that's beside the point. These ones aren't office workers, they're opponents that we're supposed to kill. The fines are very steep for destroying a skeletal farmhand, Elishnish noted. I'd rather not find out what an elder lich will cost me. They're summons, damn it, Mary snapped, temporary ones. Pestonia probably whipped them up. Miss Pestonia. Mary's hand went to the hilt of her rapier. Themis jumped between them, hands raised disarmingly. See, calm down, Mary, she said. Our problem right now is how we're going to deal with the next room. I don't think we'll have a problem with the next room, Elishnish said. We won't? They're about the same strength as the freshly manifested elder liches that you run into once in a while. None of them was wearing anything of note, either. We start out at the top of a long spiral stairway, so they're going to be separated from their minions anyway. Mary can suppress their ascent while the weaklings rush up to get crushed. It's not the last chamber on this course, so there's nothing really extreme. This one is stupid and smart at the same time, Alessia frowned. How can this be? Mary's hand came off the hilt of her weapon. She turned and stormed off, muttering darkly to herself. They caught up to her in the next room, where she was peering down the edge of the stairs. I can't see anything through this mist, Themis said, but there are a lot of undead reactions down there. The stairs are wide enough that they won't see us fighting at the top. Alessia studied their surroundings. This also means Mary can conceal herself after every round of attacks against the elder liches below. Our battle should not be a problem, as the dancer has claimed. Elishnish lifted her chin in an I told you so way, but no one was paying any attention. Themis and Alessia started casting their enchantments while Mary continued to peer into the mists below. After a minute, they nodded in readiness. I will intercept the undead coming up the stairs, Alessia said, while Mary occupies the elder liches. If she can keep their heads down, we will be able to work our way through everything at our leisure, yes? What do I do? Elishnish asked. If to attempt to stand shoulder to shoulder, the one on the inside will be exposed to spells from below. With Themis supporting me from behind, I think you will have to wait for opportunities to strike. Since it will be a long fight with many weak enemies, your song of healing should be sufficient to sustain us. Adventurers all seem to love the spell song's regenerative effects. From her observations, having a bard in their party almost always caused them to employ a more measured advance. Not that it was any great mystery why, fighting and moving while in top form was preferable to limping around and bleeding one's way from place to the place. Unfortunately, this meant that all they asked for was the same song. Elishnish had worked hard to learn a new form recently, but she never had the opportunity to use it. I can't see the bottom through this mist, Mary said, so I'm just going to send some arrows down there to start things off. What's our plan B? We can retreat while fighting, yes? Alessia said, this corridor leads straight back to the first chamber, so you should have no problem sending arrows from beyond their spellcasting range. After whittling down their numbers, we can just force our way through the rest. Alrighty, then. Here we go. The elf ranger's bowstring hummed as she rained steel over the floor of the chamber. Elishnish peeked over the edge. They weren't hitting much, but it was enough to rile up the undead below. As mana was not as plentiful as arrows, the elder liches looked up but opted not to blindly retaliate against their unseen assailant. The wraiths were the first to respond, flying up towards them. None of them made it very far, as Mary's arrows unerringly found their marks. Are those magic arrows? Themis asked. Nah, Mary replied. I'm just using a skill. It's a lot cheaper, I tell ya. The first of the skeleton warriors appeared out of the mist, and the ranger started to thin them out. The steel shafts holed skulls, shattered joints and sent many tumbling back down out of sight. Shouldn't skeletal undead be resistant to piercing damage? I heard that her old team worked in Katza, Alessia said, so it would stand to reason that she is a ranger specialized in slaying undead. Got it in one oops, here comes the first victim. With several dozen skeleton warriors making their way up the stairs, the first Elder Lich appeared behind them. Mary extinguished her presence, leaning forward to draw her bow with a focused expression. Her arrow found the undead caster's neck and buried itself in the stone wall. The Elder Lich's now detached head went back down the stairs, and its body chased off after it. Ha! Looks like I still got it after all these months. The other 3 Elder Liches stopped at the sight of the skull bouncing past them. They seemed to pause and reconsider their approach. On Alessia's end, the first of the skeleton warriors was sent flying over the edge by a swipe of the paladin's shield. She drove her heel into the pelvis of the next. It tumbled backwards, catching a dozen of its fellows before they all came to rest in a tangled heap. With the Elder Liches deliberating on their next move, Mary started to destroy the skeleton mages making their way up behind the skeleton warriors. The skeleton warriors were faring no better as Alessia methodically ground them to dust. "We will be finished here before long," Alessia said. "How should we advance? Those fellows do not seem eager to show their faces now." "How about a set of summons?" Themis offered. "We can send them down first and have them take the first set of spells. That should, shiver?" The cleric's alarmed voice faded away as Elishnish hopped down into the mists. An opportunity to strike had presented itself. She landed soundlessly beside an Elder Lich directly below the party, who seemed to have been puzzling out whether it could make any effective attacks from its position. She grabbed the right sleeve of its robe with her left hand, and her right came across in a backhand that shattered its skull. The sound of battle continued to echo down from the top of the chamber. Around the floor, the other 3 Elder Liches did not react to her arrival. "Shiver, are you Al? Hi-ee." Elishnish's heart leapt into her throat as Themis' message spell connected. "Are you some sort of assassin? How does one assassinate someone with a message spell? What happened? Why did you jump down like that?" Alessia said I should wait for opportunities to strike, and one appeared just now. "I don't know if that was a good idea. We're still less than halfway done up here. I've already destroyed one of the Elder Liches. Can Alessia start making her way down?" The cleric did not respond for several moments. "She's going for it. I hope this works." Themis' message ended, and Elishnish quietly watched as the Elder Liches moved about. One cast invisibility on itself and attempted to get in range of the advancing Alessia, but it was still driven back down by a hail of arrows. Elishnish eyed the curve of the stairs and how the Elder Liches slowly circled in an attempt to spot the descending adventurers. Elishnish placed herself in the path of the closest Elder Lich. The undead mage walked right into her, its gaze focused on the commotion above. Destruction came just as swiftly as it had with the first. The remaining 2 Elder Liches were standing together, but remained entirely unaware that they were being stalked. Elishnish padded up behind them as Alessia dispatched the last of the skeletal minions. Her first blow smashed one Elder Lich to the ground and she reached out to grab the other. Before the Elder Lich on the floor could recover, she hurled the one in her grip onto the stairs. Alessia's incredulous voice drifted down from above. What is this stupid Elder Lich doing?" Crunching noises filled the air as the sounds of battle resumed, and Elishnish stepped forward to finish off the remaining Elder Lich.